In the pause between the ringing is the second of Studio Ollie and Mingus's works, based on the stories told in Dubious Splendour by Mir Umar Hassan. Unlike the first game, the story in this is more direct. Only one storyline runs through the entire game, which makes it a bit better to stomach for me. This game still holds the same writing style that the first one did, so understanding some of the text can be quite hard, but it was grammatically better than the first game, and a majority of it is narrated as well, so that takes some of the strain off the reading. You start as an unknown character who gets a call on an oversized telephone. When you answer, the person on the other end says they're looking for a ghost to speak to. You are that ghost, apparently, and you want to move on to the afterlife, but you can't do that until you remember why you're here. You think the person on the other end can help you with that, but it turns out they called you so you could help them remember something instead. However, you're more persistent than they are, and they end up telling you the only thing they remember, the tale of Iqbal and Telephone Nagar. This story is told through you choosing from one or more text options, followed by narration. I debated for a little while on whether the voice was text-to-speech with an Indian accent, and I think it was, but it was fairly convincing, so I wasn't sure. What I was sure of, however, was that the narrator saying Telephone Nagar made me double-take the first time I heard it.
Calling it Telephone Nagar.
Whenever there were multiple dialogue options, they all led back to the exact same storyline no matter what you pressed, so there wasn't much difference with what you chose to click. As said, the story was a bit better to follow this time, because it was linear, but the style they write in involves some fairly uncommon vocabulary, so the story was a little meaty at times and tricky to wrap my head around, but I got the gist. In between story segments, you're transported between 3 different areas: the starting area, the town of doors and narrow passages, and one desert plain. That's really all the gameplay there is to the game. I guess you could say it's an exploration segment, but the area you're in is pretty small. It's also possible to escape from one of the areas you're in and walk off the edge of the map, which I did during my exploration. Maybe a hole that needs to be filled, but I don't imagine the creators expected people to try and jump off the edge of the map. You can run in this game, and the controls are a little less heavy than the first one for movement, but the camera is fairly slow to move as it was in the first one. And again, much like the first one, it's not really a game, and the areas of exploration and movement are minimal in the overall content of the game. The story itself is a poetic take on the rising influence of the British in India, talking about mining and the way the Indian citizens would serve the British whilst also trying to rise to be their equals, despite the ever-present feeling that the British wouldn't allow them to stand on level ground with them. I guess when I think about it, it's kind of awkward that I'm reviewing this, given the topic, but yeah, we'll just carry on anyway. For some reason, it seems to assimilate the British influence with telephones. Personally, I found the substitution of telephones to be a bit confusing and made me lose the trail of the story a bit, but I get that they were attempting to not be direct about what was happening. There is a twist, per se, with the story, but I won't spoil anything. Weirdly though, it's circular, and by that I mean there is no end at all to the game. The end is the start, but the circle doesn't close. By the time you get to the finish of the story being told, the game has literally restarted and you can play through the whole thing identically to the first time until the end of time, or until you quit. Once again, the visuals were quite impressive, and some of the clipping issues with objects on the ground seem to have been addressed, although items off the ground you could usually walk through. This gave you a bit of a break from looking at walls of text as you transitioned between story elements, as did the images being added into the storytelling and the narration, which made the tale a bit easier to follow this time around. The sound effects and ambient noises were good, though one sound effect came through so loud it could have counted as a jump scare. My one question to answer when I went into playing this game, mainly to help decide if I should play the third one, was, is this game better than the first one? I can say assuredly that yes, it is. There's only one story to think about, there's a hint of mystery within the storyline as you try and figure out who and where you are, the story itself is a bit more interactive, and the narration and images definitely helped take some of the weight out of those straight walls of text that we got in the first game. I think personally that the writing style isn't ideal. I know it's likely a direct translation, or as close as, from the source material, and that the original writer may have been a fan of colourful language, but there's a careful balance between colourful vocabulary and vocabulary that paints a colourful picture, and sometimes I think there are words in there that make for hard reading. Many of them I didn't know a meaning for, but managed to just work with them in the context. I didn't fully understand what was going on for all of it, which does harm the core standing of a story-based game, but it was at least better than the first time. It was a similar length to the first game too, about 20 to 25 minutes. This game is much improved from the last one. Again, it has its flaws and has minimal in-game content, but it's better to follow and much more engaging, so I think I'll give In the Pause Between the Ringing a 6 out of 10.